subject that has raised quite a few questions, the matter of time and eternity. And the first question I have to ask in regard to time is this. Dr. Clark, how old are you now, really? The next question... The next question is, please give a simple answer to this. Is our eternal God involved within time?
Yes.
All right. The next question is, how does the God-man experience time as opposed to mortal man? And also, does the Son experience time differently from the Father? And let me put the next question. Would you comment on Dr. Buswell's denial of the eternity of God, especially his assertion that time and space are in God?
Well, let me see if I can remember all that.
And there's a fourth question.
Oh, wait a minute.
There is an introduction here that tells us how thankful they are for your lectures and have really appreciated what you have said. It's in regarding to your first two lectures that I would present my question. Am I correct that you start with the presupposition that God is timeless and spaceless, at least in his essences? Now, there's another question in that sheet, but let me hand you these three.
Well, there's the one on top at any rate. How does the God-man experience time as opposed to mortal man? This is answered, of course, by the doctrine of the Incarnation. The second person of the Trinity is full deity. He is autotheos, he is God in himself. And as God, he could not have any human experiences. So in order to die, he had to become man. And he became man with a true body and a reasonable soul. He was rational, you see. But he was a man. And as a man, his thoughts came and went, so that he had this temporal experience. Insofar as he was God, he did not have this temporal experience. He remained omniscient. During the years of his incarnation, he still exercised all his divine attributes. And he was immutable and omnipotent. The world depended on him during those 30 years as much as it had depended on him for the previous part of its history. So that the doctrine of the Incarnation indicates that Christ had these experiences not as opposed to mortal man, but the same kind of experiences. And I'm taking Augustine's view of time as being the coming and going of ideas in the mind. Now, the second part of this question, I guess I've already answered. Does the Son experience time differently from the way the Father does? Well, in his human nature, yes. In his divine nature, no. The difficulty with the question seems to me to be that it does not keep in mind the two natures of Christ, the Creed of Chalcedon, which would dispose of those objections. Now then, this is another question. Is our eternal God involved within time? A simple answer was yes. But perhaps it must be indicated how the eternal God is involved in time. Well, he controls all his creatures and all their actions. And these actions are not only physical actions, but mental actions. So that God is the cause of the succession of ideas in our mind. And that succession is time, so God is involved in time in that way. But he is not involved in time in the sense that he thinks of one thing at one time and then forgets it and gets a new idea at another time. This is inconsistent with omniscience, and that is the way I answer that question.
But now, let me ask this question then again. Am I correct that you start with the presupposition that God is timeless and spaceless, at least in his essences?
No, I don't start with that. As I said in the lecture, my fundamental proposition is the inerrancy of Scripture. The Westminster Confession and the authors of it had to face a question whether they should put the Scriptures in the first chapter and God in the second chapter, or whether, as in other creeds, God would be in the first chapter and the Scriptures would be somewhere down the line. They deliberately chose to put the Scriptures first and the doctrine of God second, because it is in the Scripture that a person learns what God is. And unless you have the revelation to begin with, you don't have the knowledge that is required for the writing of a creed. This question was, would you comment on Dr. Buswell's denial of the eternity of God, especially his assertion that time and space are in God? Well, God, of course, knows that we think of things and forget them and so on. The answer to that question is the same as the answer to the previous ones.
Do you have any comment, Dr. Benton?
No, sir.
Dr. Morris?
No, except that I would certainly agree with Dr. Clark, and I would like to underline that one, that the incarnation has to be taken as real. That when Christ became a man, he didn't play at it. He really became a man, and so he knows time as we know it. He entered our frame, but this doesn't have this doesn't involve any modification on his eternal functions. The incarnation was something that was added to the functions of the second person of the Trinity rather than substituted for the functions.
I see that I'm going to have to start omitting certain questions here. We're just not going to get to all of them, but there's a few here that we should touch on. Here's a question that I think we should address to Dr. Clark, along with possibly a few others. Dr. Clark, how do you account for the fact that classical Reformed Orthodoxy, Calvin, Turretini, Westminster Divines, Edwards, Hodge, Warfield, etc., with the exception of the more recent Dutch tradition, Kuyper, Bavinck, present-day Free University, Van Til, Toronto School, so grievously erred, that in quotes, in opposing fideism as exhibited in presuppositionalism? What in principle is the difference between criticizing the husk, kernel, / form content distinctions as subjective, which you do, and criticizing presuppositionalism for asserting subjectively a triune God who reveals himself in Scripture, which you will not do? Would you pass this on to him?
Gladly.
Well, what this question says I will not do, possibly I will do. At any rate, I think the answer is this. I'll repeat a part of the lecture I gave. Every system of philosophy, whether it's Platonism, Aristotelianism in antiquity, or logical positivism in this century, every system of philosophy must have a first principle. Since it is first, it cannot have been deduced from anything prior. And in this sense, logical positivism or Aristotelianism is just as fideistic as I am. It means that a person accepts certain axioms from which he deduces conclusions. And I accept the truth of the Scripture as my axiom and deduce conclusions from that. And you can call that fideism, which some people think is a nasty term. It simply means you have faith. The logical positivists place their faith in sensation. And you cannot, and I wish to make this clear, you cannot guarantee the accuracy of observation by observation. If you wish to demonstrate the reliability of observation, you'd have to have something prior to observation. But there is never anything prior to your first principle. Well, I think that takes care of it.